it sort of felt to me as I was sort of trying to dream up a structure that when push comes to shove, writers don't give a shit about business models. And in a certain sense, none of us should. It's just a question of whether it accomplishes what we need accomplished. And so part of what I sort of thought would be worth trying to sort of find out and worth me responding to would be, what are the things that Kyo and Lynne look for from a publisher? Which is also another way of saying, what are you afraid of as a writer from what the world, how the world engages with you or fails to engage with you. Kyo is going through this for the first time. Lynne is going through this for the 9th time? 12th. But who's counting? That may be one of the fears. Someone out there is counting, are they? And what, so in a certain sense, to interrogate me, what can I do as a publisher to address, allay, respond to the needs of writers? Yeah. Why did you forget my books?
No,
would be a good.
No, I'm not going to rub that in. Not any more than I already have. But what you say we're not interested in that old model. But what do you see as being wrong with that old model, and what are you doing to change that model?
I mean, the old model effectively is that you connect writers and readers by having writers submit their work to filters, be they agents or editors or publishers, and it kind of it's kind of like an hourglass. An enormous amount of writing flows into a choke point, and that choke point is controlled by agents and editors, and then it flows back out again in a pyramid of sales reps. Say in America, a couple of thousand of them, probably now down to 500 of them, and then into retailers. 20 years ago, 10,000 locations, now about 2,000 locations. And so that's the kind of, that's the business model we had for 150 years. At its outset, it was tremendously innovative. Booksellers were the first retailers to allow customers to touch the product on shelves. We were the first element of our global culture to figure out how to reproduce what we created and allow it to be consumed by many. So we invented effectively reproduction, cultural reproduction, and then we invented modern retail, and then things got kind of static. And so what we have then is this. So I mean, I can think of things that are wrong with that system, but rather than say what I think is wrong with that system, and mostly what I think is wrong with that system is that it's profoundly undemocratic, incredibly haphazard, and really inefficient. But that notwithstanding, whatever I think of it, it's fucking broken.
Well, when the first time I was published, I mean, I've often thought that people who have been published a lot should write a handbook, a guide for first-time authors, because you really have no idea what is going to happen. I remember my first publisher saying to me, "Well, we'll have to convince the sales force about your book." And I just thought, what does she mean? I mean, I had no idea. She's just bought the book. Why would she have to convince them? Well, clearly, she wants they want to sell it. I had no idea. I just did not know the publishing industry at all. They paid me $5,000 for that novel. They pay a lot more money to somebody else. Their salespeople work on commission, don't they? And so they're going to sell the book that costs more, that gets more press, that because then they'll make more money in the numbers. And they're not generally going to spend a lot of time talking about a book that may be represented in a bookstore by 5 copies. It's just not worth their while. But I had no idea as a first-time author what that meant. Then there were other things that happened. I simply didn't understand what how the social network worked, to the extent that there was one in 1987 when my first novel came out. That was important, and there's always the focus on the New York Times review, and I think it's less and less important all the time. At least I hope so.
Yeah, I mean, as I described that business model, which the existing are the sort of the one that is still sort of there, faintly visible. I mean, one of the things that strike me about as I describe it is that I'm describing something in a way that almost no one in the industry I've ever heard described that way. So we've got a business model that is effectively invisible to us. Because we can't even sort of describe to anyone how it works. We simply describe what happens, what our job is. You know, I am an agent, I am an editor, I am a sales rep. So it makes it tremendously difficult to describe to a writer how the system works, because all people really understood was their own part in the system. Your editor's job was to acquire your book and then convince the sales reps she was smart to have done so. And what was your vision of publishing as you sort of thought that this was something that you might want to spend many years of your life doing?
I'm not sure that I had a particularly accurate or even clear vision of it. I mean, I have some friends who had been through the process, and so I had heard about it a bit, but it all sounded kind of mysterious and very disempowered. And one of the things that's been my experience with working with Richard is quite the opposite of that. Richard wants to explain the business model if anyone wants to listen. So he actually answers my questions all the time. I'm like, wait, how does this work? And like, who do we send the advanced review copies to? And when do I get to edit the I got to delete a word from the final version. I think Lynne did that too. But the kind of openness that is present in Richard's model is very welcome, and also not at all what I was expecting.
One of the things that Richard does very differently is his approach to bound galleys. First years that I was being published, I thought the bound galley must be so expensive to produce, because they said, we're only going to make 40 bound galleys. That was it, And this was supposed to be your whole publicity. That would go out to the press beforehand, and then when I myself decided I was going to do some bound galleys for my essay collection with another publisher and didn't have the money to do it, they said, I found out it costs almost nothing to do bound galleys. I couldn't believe it. It was one of the crazy, so publishers, they make this thing seem like they're illuminated manuscripts. and it's the cheapest form of publicity for them, really, to send these out. They should be papering editors, magazines. They should just be sending these out. Oh no, we'll do 40.
And ours actually say please distribute as opposed to please don't.
In fact, I didn't put it on your one, Keo, because I felt like I'd made my point already, but on one of them I said, you know what, you can go ahead and sell it if you need the money. Because typically publishers had these sort of vicious admonitions about how this is absolutely not for resale. And I sort of thought, well, actually, they sell them anyway, so why not just embrace it and say, go ahead if you need the money. I mean, so many reviewers get paid so poorly anyway, that why not just sort of recognize and embrace what was already happening and acknowledge that if I gave them something that was worth, $6 to the Strand, why not let that reviewer have it? Because now all of a sudden now they had $6 in their pocket because of this publishing operation. And look at us kind of favorably. I mean, the thing that happens when you have that hourglass that I described, then a certain phenomenon happens. It's both cultural and economic. And it's what you can sort of call artificial scarcity. And the galley is kind of an example of that. And it's sort of ironic because publishing came into existence out of a certain kind of economics of abundance, or certainly an effort to change the economic model from one of scarcity. It takes a monk about as long to transcribe something as it would have taken that text to have been written in the first place. Sort of the writing 1.0 economy, reproduction takes about the same amount of time as the creation of the original work, depending on what you believe about how, let's say, the Bible was written in the first place. It may have actually taken longer to reproduce it than to have it sort of like directly transmitted into your brain by God. So that bespeaks a certain scarcity, right? Only so many copies can be made under those circumstances. And so when copies can be made mechanically, then you start dealing with the economics of abundance. And as a very brilliant writer, theorist, colleague of Keogh's has pointed out, our society doesn't do very well with abundance. We know how to deal with scarcity. We ration, we save, we scrimp, we hoard. We know how to deal with scarcity. But abundance really messes us up. We've got abundant oil, and look what we do with it. We've got abundant food now, and look what we do with it. We become obese, or we become anorexic, or we poison our water or our air. We fuck up everything that we have a lot of and do a pretty good job managing things we don't have much of. We do a very good job with gold and diamonds. But give us something we have a lot of and watch us kind of mess everything up, and civil wars. I mean, diamonds contribute to civil wars too, to some degree, but and so we're in this situation where because the digital has made abundance even more abundant, especially when it comes to our ability to write and disseminate what we write, then very, 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 very big thing happens, which is that when the supply of something increases dramatically and demand doesn't increase that dramatically, its price goes down. There's just no other way around it. And you can yell at Amazon for making the things $9.99, and you can yell at publishers for allegedly devaluing content because you've dropped your price. But the brute reality is that when the supply increases dramatically and the demand doesn't, the price goes down. And the supply of books in the United States increased 40-fold from 1990 to 2010. 25,000 titles in 1990, 1 million titles in 2010.